Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of NHLN Opinion Plus, a weekly series airing every Friday. This is a space for our opinions where we talk about current events and questions the Latino community is curious about. Today, we are joined by Doug Howard, Housing Stability Program Manager of the Front Door Agency. Welcome, Doug. Thank you for joining us this week on NHLN Opinion Plus.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. How you been?
Can't complain. Everyone's happy and healthy in the family. Everyone here at the Front Door Agency is happy and healthy. So, we're in a good.
That's great to hear. So I'll be asking a couple questions just about the impact of the pandemic and how it's currently impacting the work that you're doing, and some other issues with affordable housing for communities within New Hampshire. Any questions before we get started?
No, I think we should be good. I look forward to the conversation, and hopefully I can answer these questions to the best of my.
Absolutely, Doug. So I wanted to start off by asking, how is the pandemic still affecting the work that you're doing with the Front Door Agency?
So we're seeing a lot of residual effects from the pandemic. A lot of folks who, were working jobs that weren't bringing in a ton of money to begin with are still having a little bit of trouble kind of getting back up on their feet. So between our agency and some of our partners out in the community, I think we're doing a really good job at, making sure that landlords are still getting paid, people are getting their rent in on time, utilities are getting taken care of. So it's really a community-wide effort. It's not just us. We do our part, taking care of the folks that come to us and inquire about services. But if we need to, coordinate with other community providers out there, we will, and we do what we need to do to support the folks that are out here in the Greater Nashville area.
Absolutely, that's really interesting to hear. So within your core values of transformational housing and housing stability and financial literacy, can you go a little bit more in depth on what these core values mean to you and the work that you're doing with creating affordable housing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what we want to do is we want to make sure that the folks that we work with understand that they are supported and they're valued as human beings first, and as members of our community. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that they have all the support that they need in order to work towards stability, and that's really financial stability and housing stability. So what that looks like in all of our programs is a little bit different. They all get funded a little bit different, and they all come with different little quirks to it. So for instance, in our transformational housing, it's a live-in facility. So there are several families that are at our TH program currently, and they all have their own separate living spaces, but they have a shared kitchen, and dining area. But they have access to case managers, all the time. And the point of that program is for the families who are there to be able to go to work on their education, go back to school if they need to, and be able to stash money away, because at some point, they want to be able to get back out into the community, be able to afford market rate rent, which right now is incredibly high for a lot of families. So getting them that hand up, not necessarily that handout, is what we really want to strive.
Absolutely, those are all really great values. I wanted to ask specifically, what are some of the biggest challenges the people that you're helping with face to be able to make rent and to make ends meet and be able to make sure that their children are getting the resources that they need, the healthcare and the resources, be able to get a good education? What are some of these challenges that these families and people that you're working with face in terms of making ends meet?
There's a variety of things happening. So I mean, one of the things that I see a lot of is just you know not necessarily knowing how to access services. And we see a lot of families in our community that have a lot of pride, and that's well and good. We want our families to take pride in taking care of themselves and their own. But sometimes it makes it a little bit difficult for asking for help, and asking for help, at the beginning instead of at the tail end. So, that seems to be one of the issues that I see. Another Another issue that I tend to see is just the lack of affordable housing in our state. So while we do have some rentals that are coming up, a lot of what's being built is really not for a lot of the folks who are already here. We're seeing a lot of young 20-somethings moving in who work in the greater Boston area and who can afford, a $1,700 one bedroom. But for the average family in the greater Nashville area, that's not really affordable. So that's something that we're up against right now too.
Absolutely. Can you go so, I mean, it's really interesting that you pointed out that it's has to do, if I understand correctly, has to do with just with the people that are living within New Hampshire, and you mentioned that there's a lot of people that work in the greater Boston area that can afford living in the housing of New Hampshire. They can afford a 1,700 one bedroom. But what about the people that are from New Hampshire that grew up in New Hampshire and that are trying to develop themselves, try to develop a career within New Hampshire? What do they face issues in terms of not earning enough money to make affordable housing, to make ends meet, or are they facing like other financial issues in terms of just the areas that they live in and the type of backgrounds that they come from?
Well, I would say that New Hampshire has been changing quite a lot over the past couple of years, and I think that just taking a look at, for instance, a one bedroom or a studio in the greater Boston area is probably going to run you around 2 grand to about $2,200. It's While it is a little bit of a farther drive, it might make more sense for that young 20-something working in the greater Boston area to live in New Hampshire, where it is a little bit cheaper to live. But unfortunately, it just displaces some of our families that have been here for a number of years. So, when we talk about housing and homelessness, especially around homelessness, we're not always talking about folks just sleeping out in tents, camping out in their car. We see a lot of families that are living doubled up, tripled up, with other families and friends, just because that's the only way they're going to be able to make it work financially. So, making sure that families are safe and have what they need in order to, be good on their own. That's really kind of what we're.
Absolutely, that's really interesting. And so like so it seems that, I mean, there are issues with just like the people of New Hampshire, since New Hampshire has been changing from a variety of different perspectives. Can you explain a little bit more, if you can, about the issues of like communities of color, specifically Latinx or ethnic minorities? What type of, do they face, very similar issues, or do they face a different set of circumstances in fighting against homelessness and making sure that they can make ends meet for themselves and for their families and to grow their families?
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting. As a person of color working in this industry, there aren't very many of us. Those of us that are working in this industry in New Hampshire, we really want to just try to take care of each other. But in terms of the folks that we serve who are Latin, Hispanic, Black, people who did. Um, I think one of the things that we try to get across is that it's okay to ask for help. I think that one of the things that we want to make sure of is that people feel welcomed when they come into our agency, when they apply for services. We're not here to judge anybody for any reason whatsoever. We want everyone who comes into our facility to feel loved, feel welcomed. And sometimes I think that's really one of the biggest barriers, is just the fear of judgment, um, and the idea that they're not going to get the help, that they are going to be thought of as less, and that they're not worth the help from these agencies. But it couldn't be anything farther than the truth. Everyone that comes in through our doors, the one thing I always want to get across is that they're loved, they're cared about, they're respected. Even if for whatever reason my agency can't help, like I said before, we want to be able to connect them to the most appropriate agency and make that transition as simple as humanly possible. You know, whether that's me connecting directly with a case manager at a different program, or just assisting them with the call, directly so that, they don't have to feel like they're going through it on their own. Because that can be really.
That is very interesting. So it sounds like there's a very big cultural presence where if let's say I'm a person of color and I need help to make ends meet, I feel ashamed if I'm asking for help from the if I'm asking for help from the front door agency. But do you think that from a legislative perspective and from a societal perspective in terms of like legislation and just laws, do you think that there are things that are happening that are preventing certain groups from getting the resources that they need, from getting the programs, from getting the assistance programs that they need in order to make ends meet and to get affordable housing, or is it solely just cultural based and that is something that we as people need to try to dismantle because everybody deserves the same amount of help and treatment as anybody else?
Well, I mean, for instance, like just being able to access an ID. I mean, not everyone has the ability to access that, having to access a social security card in order to uh, really work with some of the programs that are out in our community. So yeah, there are some things that, make it difficult for folks in order to access these types of services. And a lot of those folks are disproportionately people of color, which is really unfortunate. So I do think that there is a need in order to, work with our local government, our state government on figuring out how we can make sure that we can take care of our folks. Um, I think getting back to kind of what we do at Front Door is, we try not to just say no to somebody if for whatever reason they can't produce some paperwork. We want to make sure that um, we get a good enough idea of what the situation is and then make sure that, again, we can connect them to the appropriate agency. Again, regardless of whether or not we can help. We don't want to just have to say no to somebody. We want to, do all we possibly can in order to support our community members.
That's a great I think that's a great way of looking at it too, even if what you mentioned too, there are people that walk in saying that they don't have a social security number, that's important. Taking consideration that there are people too that they also deserve the same treatment as anybody else. So can you kind of go into depth more on like what type of programs are you using to help educate the public or help like get your name out there? Because it sounds like there are a lot of people that don't want to reach out maybe because they don't know or maybe because they just don't feel comfortable reaching out, but also what are some of the other resources that you mentioned before you reach out, you lead certain groups to other resources if you can't be the person to help? What are some of these resources, and just can you go more into depth on the programs that you use to assist people from a general perspective?
No doubt, absolutely. So, I mean, I will always, say first and foremost, if someone out there is going through a housing crisis, let's say they're doubled up, tripled up, they may be staying at a motel, hotel, something like that, and they have kids of school age, always connect with your local student liaison. So every district in the entire country has to have someone available in order to support students who are experiencing homelessness. And I know the word homeless can mean a lot of different things and it can really be stigmatized in some ways, but there are resources for children in order for them to access school, regardless of what their housing situation is. Making sure that kids can be enrolled regardless of whether they have a social security card, whether or not they have identification, whether or not the parents have identification. So it's mandated that we make sure that all kids have that equal access. So that's something that I would always recommend. So touch base with your local school district if you don't know about that. Our friends over at Southern New Hampshire Services and then the other CAP agencies around the state are doing a fantastic job rolling out the New Hampshire Emergency Rental Assistance Program. So if someone out there is having difficulty taking care of their rent and they were impacted by COVID-19 in any way, shape, or form, definitely touch base with your local CAP agency. I would highly recommend it. They're awesome people and they're doing everything that they can in order to take care of families in our community.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Doug. I would like to ask if there's anything else that you'd like to say to our audience before we depart.
Yeah, sure. Please feel free to give us a call if you're interested in learning more about what we do. You can find us at frontdooragency.org. If you have any questions for me, please feel free to give me a ring or send me an email. My contact info is on the About page on our website.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Doug, for joining us this week on NHLN Opinion Plus. And join us for another episode in 2 weeks. For more information about our discussion today, check out our website on nhllatinonews.com. Follow us on Twitter at NHLatinoNews and in our Instagram at NH_Latino News. I'm Brian Zapata with NHLN Opinion Plus. We'll see you next time.